Good morning. Welcome to First Parish in Hingham, also known as Old Ship Church. I'm Trish McAleer, a member of the Board of Trustees. As Unitarian Universalists, we gather here as an open community that honors freedom of belief, encourages spiritual growth in ourselves and our children, and shares the wisdom of the many religious traditions with reverence for the earth and in service to humanity. We gather here on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts people, the original nation of this land. We are mindful that for the Massachusetts people of every generation, this land is sacred. If you are visiting or newly attending our services, welcome. You and everyone else is welcome to gather for coffee and conversation just down the street at 14 Main. Please note this week's schedule of events in your order of worship. And in particular, here are two items that I'd like to note. Tonight at 7 p.m. on Zoom, our Social Justice Committee folks will be leading a discussion of Jeremy Williams's Climate Change is Racist, Race, Privilege, and the Struggle for Climate Justice. The Zoom link can be found in this week's newsletter. Also, we invite you to be part of the show. Through shared worship, being an usher, a chalice lighter, or a reader, just once or several times, you can give back to Old Ship. And by joining our worship and music team, you can help create our worship experience. Please see Karen Churchill if you'd like to help, and we do need more volunteers. We're happy that you are with us today. We welcome you to bring all that you are to this, our congregation, your beliefs and traditions, your identity, your story, and the wisdom of your years. You are welcome here. If you are looking for inspiration, comfort, or connection, we hope that you will find it here today. Our morning service will now begin.
Good morning. I'm Edmund Robinson, the minister, and my call to worship this morning is a poem that appeared in the New Yorker several weeks ago by the new poet laureate of the United States, Ada Limon. She calls it Hell or High Water. Not churchgoers or joiners, still my people sang, up Highway 12 or Arnold Drive, depending on the traffic. Blue moon, you saw me standing alone. My maternal grandfather would croon in a big put-on cowboy voice like Marty Robbins as we barreled up the 79 from Julian to Cali Mesa after all their money disappeared in a savings and loan scam. They lost everything they thought was safe, come hell or high water. On the other side, El Otro Lado, my grandfather would sing Lydia Mendoza, Rancheras, and Mal Hombre, songs about La Frontera on our way from Oceanside to Laguna Beach. Also here in the mountains, I remember driving up from Glen Ellen, the drive interminable, my brother's pugilistic tendencies bruising me on the back seat's sticky vinyl. Even then, we could be swayed to sing. At the campsite, my father would pull out his guitar and we'd beg him for A Cat Came Back or 500 Miles, something with a chorus we could sing along to. Sometimes we'd even like the sad songs. Drifting to black between the flames of the fire and the aspen and the pines all flickering in the distance. What was the difference between a song sung on the journey and a song sung once you got there. One was about passing the time, the other about bellowing your presence to the rocks and stones. I don't know. I know that we sang. And here in this valley, I can't help but think of how my father pulled out his guitar at my stepmother's deathbed, which was just their bed, really. At home up north, and on a cold, clear day, he sang 500 miles. And she was already almost gone, and I wept, and his voice sounded so strong. So when the hospice nurse came and said, "You have no religion, right?" I didn't know how to answer, because we did. It was this. It was all those years tied together on the road, singing at the top of our lungs, harmonious and inharmonious both, and with gusto. Our voices meshed together like tree roots, not for any good reason other than the sheer pleasure of it. Something to pass the time, like beauty, like going to the mountaintop just to go. It's the old way. It's the only way I know. A mountain, an echo, a coming back and coming back, a chorus.
Good morning. I'm lighting the chalice this morning for shared ministry with this brief, I hope it's brief, little reading. Ministry is all that we do. Ministry is all that we do together. Ministry is that quality of being in community that affirms human dignity, beckons forth hidden possibilities, invites us into deeper, reverent relationships, and carries forward our heritage of hope and liberation. Ministry is all we do together as we celebrate triumphs of our human spirit, miracles of birth and life, wonders of devotion and sacrifice. Ministry is all that we do together with one another in terror and torment, in grief and misery, in pain, enabling us in the presence of death to say yes to life. We who minister together speak and serve and live the best we know with full knowledge that it is never really quite enough. And yet we are reassured by lostness found, fragments reunited, wounds healed, and joy shared. Ministry is what we all do and are doing together.
Thank you, Maureen. Let us open our worship with one more step, number 168. invite Fan Leonard to come up and conduct our joys and concerns.
Thank you. I'm Fan Leonard from the Pastoral Group, and I'm here to invite you to for any of the joys, concerns, sorrows that you may want to share. Sharing a joy makes it greater, and sharing a sorrow eases the pain a little. So, will you, if you'd like to speak, raise your hand, please, and the microphone will be brought to you, and we will hear what you have to say.
A Candle
thank you.
of Hope, Eileen, she, her, Eileen McIntyre. A candle of hope for civil discourse in our town, our Commonwealth, and our nation as this presidential year continues.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning, Deb Lash, she, her. I'd like to light a candle of joy for my nephew Christopher and his significant other who have announced after 11 years and one child that they plan to get married, which is very exciting. So that's the second nephew who's announced plans to get married this year. Um, Two of my late brother's boys, and it's sad that he's not going to be here to see that, but it'll be great to all get together for a happy event instead of a funeral. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Elizabeth Torrey, she, her. It's with great sadness that to announce the death of a lifelong friend of mine and in the music world, Brian Jones, the former choir director and organist at Trinity Church for many, many years, and then the director of the Copley Singers. Brian played for Weston's in My Wedding in 1966 at St. John's here in Hingham. He played for our son Matt's wedding in Memorial Chapel in Cambridge, and he played for our son Ben's wedding right here in Old Ship. Sometimes there are no words for the sadness in the heart.
Janice McPhillips, she, her. I have a joy and a sorrow concern to share. First, a joy for the sunshine. Someone told me it was 11 days without sun. I don't know if that bothered any of you, but it certainly registered on my radar that it was gone and now it's back. And a concern for a fellow Old Ship member, Chris Wolf, longtime member of this community who has been struggling with mental health challenges for the past several months.
From our Zoom audience, a candle of concern from Kate Philbin for her niece who is having health issues. And then from Lorraine Varney Riggs, a candle of joy for the Candlelight concert Friday night.
I'm Ruben, and I have a candle of joy because my granddaughter just made me a great grandpa. And so I'm blessed with that.
A candle of joy that we are starting a coming of age class today following the service, and we have some wonderful teens who will be participating.
Judy Flaherty would like to light a candle for Shirley Brown, who took a fall. She's home, no breakage of anything, but a gash. And she just wanted to light a candle so everybody knew about that.
Thank you. These candles burn also for all, anything that you hold in your hearts but have not mentioned this morning. Thank you.
Now let us take a few moments for silent meditation, and I'll close it with a prayer. Mother Nature's prayer. Ursula Goodenough. Our Mother, who art within us, hallowed be thy name. Thy ways evolve. Thy will calls forth this earth that is now our heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and fill us with tenderness as we repair our trespasses. And lead us not into destruction, but deliver us into harmony. For thine is our source and our substrate and our glory forever and ever. Amen.
Peace Good morning. This reading is from, excuse me, this reading is from Benjamin Lincoln and the American Revolution by David B. Mattern. It's from chapter 1, The Wellsprings of Ambition. Of the many influences that shaped the life and character of Benjamin Lincoln, none proved so profound as the trinity of town, church, and family. Each in different but mutually supportive ways helped mold his idea of the world and his place in it. As he once pointed out, see the care taken of man by the benevolent creator of the world in the order and system so conspicuous in all creation around us. We must feel out safety on knowing that there cannot be any clashing of parts, but that each will move on its own orb. Order and system were indeed conspicuous in the New England of his day. Men and women were tied by bonds of obligation or kinship, or by covenant with one another. All knew their place in the hierarchical order, and most found satisfaction in moving about within this frictionless world. So solid and secure was Lincoln in his various guises as townsman, church member, kin, and neighbor, that he could write with satisfaction in his old age that there never was a moment in my life that I was not made happy on the reflection that I was born in the town of Hingham.
Now let us receive the offering for the advancement of the ministries of this church. think that's what old wine in new bottles or something like that. Just taking a old chestnut like that and revising it in a grand, marchy manner. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. The Lincolns in context. Students of history often engage in rancorous debates about what is called the great man theory, which holds that historical events happen because a great man steps into a role to make them happen. It was associated with the Scottish historian and philosopher Thomas Carlyle, but it's still being debated today. We're coming in a week to honor our 16th U.S. President, Abraham Lincoln, who is considered by many to be the greatest president we have had in our history. And we're fortunate to be thinking of him in an institution which is older than he is, but touches his family's genealogy at 2 points. Of course, I know that many of you listening to this sermon are more familiar with its history than I am. I've been pointed to some solid history by Max Nobish at the Hingham Historical Society, but any mistakes that I make are mine alone. If you find some mistakes, let's talk after the service. The church I served as interim before I came here was the First Church in Boston, which has also been called First and Second in Back Bay. It was founded by John Winthrop and about 700 mostly Puritan settlers who came from England on a fleet of ships led by the Arbella in 1630 to form the Massachusetts Bay Colony. It was Winthrop who put into words the Puritan vision of a new society, a city on a hill, which would recreate the religious world that Jesus intended. They took that seriously in the Massachusetts Bay Colony. Many of the Puritans who came with that first group had been practicing their religion in a county in eastern England called Lincolnshire. You may see it on the map that's stuck into your, those are England's counties. And you see Lincolnshire is sort of straight north of London. And so when those colonists, this is the 1630 group, found a suitable place to settle on the Shawmut Peninsula of Massachusetts, they named the place after one of the principal towns of that county, Boston. Those first settlers hadn't come for the climate or the economic opportunity, but because the English church had started making life miserable for Puritans again. There soon followed other groups after Winthrop's group, such as the group that came in 1637. Like the Winthrop group, this group came from East Anglia. All of this portion of England is called East Anglia. Many from the village of Hingham in the county of Norfolk. The ship they came on was called John and Dorothy. One of them was named Samuel Lincoln. Samuel was only 15 years old when he made the voyage. But unlike the Boston immigrants, Samuel was not emigrating to America because of religious persecution. He had a wealthy grandfather, but the grandfather decided to disinherit his children by his first wife and leave all his money to his third wife. Samuel was forced to adopt a trade. He apprenticed himself as a weaver to one Francis Lawes, L-A-W-E-S, of Norwich. In 1637, Lawes and his family immigrated to Massachusetts, and Samuel went with them. Samuel's older brother Thomas, also a weaver, had immigrated in 1635. Samuel landed in Charlestown, but soon joined his brother in the new town of Hingham, named after the origin place of many of the settlers there. Because there are so many people in the genealogy with same or similar names, the Thomas Lincoln who was settled in Hingham is referred to as the weaver, and Samuel Lincoln is also referred to as the weaver or the immigrant. Despite being twice married, Thomas the weaver had no children, and on his death, he willed a considerable estate to Samuel and Samuel's children. In the Wikipedia entry for Samuel Lincoln, It is said that he helped build the old ship, though it wasn't called that until much later. Samuel Lincoln did not die until 1690, so it is possible that he was here at the raising of this structure in 1681. Why did they come? Some came to escape religious persecution, but many came because their cousins came. As a recent history has it, quote, family was a key factor, as the trickle in of Lincoln's suggests. Nicholas Jacob brought with him to Charlestown in 1633 his cousin Thomas Lincoln, a weaver, and after 2 years in Watertown, Thomas chose to move to Hingham. His brother Samuel decided to join him in 1637 after 4 years in Salem. Thomas, a miller, came in 1635. That was Thomas the weaver in the previous sentence. So Thomas, a miller, another Thomas, came in 1635, and so did Thomas a cooper, Thomas a husbandman, farmer, and his brother Stephen did not arrive until 1638, unquote. But all the Lincolns mentioned just now were not enough to get the new Hingham recognized as a town. You may remember what I said last week. To incorporate a town, you needed a meeting house and a minister. Reverend Peter Hobart, 30 years old, was prevailed on by relatives in 1635 to settle in Hingham. We have therefore an abundant representation of Lincolns at the beginning of Hingham, Massachusetts, which is not surprising since the county just to the north of Norfolk, England, is named Lincolnshire. There's surprising clarity about the genealogy. We know that President Abraham Lincoln was a seventh generation descendant of Samuel Lincoln, the immigrant from Hingham, England. We know that Samuel's mother's family, the family tree, the Gilmans of Exeter, New Hampshire, also contained many notables, including a signer of the U.S. Constitution. Most of the family names were biblical, and they recycled them across the generations. The males in line from Samuel to President Abraham would have the following names: Samuel, Mordecai, John, Abraham, Thomas, and Abraham, the president. And we moderns say, so what? That only proves that these old families stuck to biblical names. It doesn't say much about the people behind the names. That is true. But what is history? Is it the great deeds of great men and women? Or is it the ordinary life pursued by ordinary people? There are several books in the Bible which start with genealogies, what students who are new to the Bible soon take to calling the begats. To a modern mind, it is nonsensical to place such weight on one's ancestors, but to the ancient author, this lineage is what constitutes the bond between the present and the past. Particularly the Torah sets forth the stories by which it is claimed that a special relationship exists between God and the descendants of the biblical patriarch Abraham. So the recital of genealogies in the sacred text is a sort of a proof of the existence of this divine covenant. Covenant theology is not restricted to Jews. It was lifted from the Hebrew Bible by the Puritans, among others, and it became a dominant theme in the New England Way, the combination of sacred and secular government that the Puritans set up. It's a very important mindset. We don't look at a genealogy with the same eyes that ancient people did. There are genealogies online which we can consult, and if we know exactly who we're looking for, we can find that person's immediate family. But if we are in search of recreation or enlightenment, we might be disappointed in a list of names that seems to have nothing more useful to our lives than names in a phone book or a database. Who in this crowd of names stands out? Let me give a few examples in the conventional sense of Lincolns from Hingham who performed public service. They're listed in a Wikipedia entry called Lincoln Family. And only when you reach the end of the third entry is the fact disclosed that all three are descended from Samuel Lincoln, the original immigrant from Hingham, England, to Hingham, Mass., the line which includes President Abraham. In this line is Levi Lincoln Sr., who was born in 1749 in Hingham, to Enoch and Rachel Fearing Lincoln. Fearing is a name, the old Hingham name. He was a lawyer. This is Levi Sr., was a lawyer who practiced in Worcester, briefly a member of Congress, but who most notably served as Thomas Jefferson's Attorney General, and in that office played a key role in the case of Marbury versus Madison. That's the case which gives rise to the very important American practice of judicial review, a crucial component of the rule of law. For it gives courts the right to review the constitutionality of laws and to strike down any provision found to be unconstitutional. After serving as Attorney General, Levi Lincoln Sr. was elected Lieutenant Governor of Massachusetts in 1807, but failed to win the governorship the next year and retired from politics. He died in 1820. Next, Levi Lincoln Jr., 1782 to 1868, was the son of Levi Sr., but was born in Worcester instead of Hingham because that was where his parents lived. He was a lawyer like his father and was elected governor of Massachusetts and served from 1825 to 1834, which makes him the governor with the longest consecutive terms in the history of the Commonwealth. He also served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1835 to 1841, at the same time John Quincy Adams was serving there. Levi Lincoln's younger brother was Enoch Lincoln, 1788 to 1829, also born in Worcester, also a lawyer, served as a congressman from Massachusetts and from Maine. Maine, as most of you know, was a part of Massachusetts, which was later recognized as a separate state. So Enoch could change from one state to another without moving. He also served as governor of Maine from 1827 to his death in 1829. But the Lincoln from Hingham who acquired the most fame prior to President Abraham was clearly General Benjamin Lincoln, 1733 to 1810, who distinguished himself in military service during the American Revolution and received the surrender sword offered by the British at Yorktown. He also served as Secretary at War for the Confederation Congress under the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union before the Constitution brought our U.S. government into being. General Lincoln was born in Hingham in 1733, the sixth child and first son of Colonel Benjamin Lincoln. Of the early Hingham Lincoln's settlers, this branch is descended from Thomas Lincoln, the Cooper. It has no direct ties to President Abraham Lincoln. A few moments ago, Mike Dwyer read an excerpt from the opening chapter of the biography of General Lincoln by David Mattern, called Benjamin Lincoln and the American Revolution. And I was struck by a couple of turns of phrase in that passage. Quote, of the many influences that shaped the life and character of Benjamin Lincoln, none proves so profound as the trinity of town, church, and family. As you follow General Lincoln's military career through the hardships of the Revolutionary War, he keeps yearning to return to Hingham. The authors describe Hingham society of the time as a place where, quote, men and women were tied by bonds of obligation or kinship or by covenant with one another. Bing! There's that word, covenant, again. The author of this secular biography of a secular man comes back to this theological term, which was basic to his mindset. After distinguishing himself and getting wounded in the foot in the northern actions of the Revolution, General Lincoln was asked to take command of the Continental Army in the South. Once he assumed command, he experienced a great disconnect. Congress and the civil authorities in the Carolinas and Georgia expected the Continental Army to keep the British at bay, if not to drive them out. but were not willing to provide the troops to do the job or institute a draft to get more. And the South Carolina white population ardently opposed another proposal put forth by the Continental Army to recruit or use slaves somehow to help in the effort. Frustrated, General Lincoln tried to understand why these locals wouldn't turn out to fight for independence, as the New Englanders had, and why a draft was even being considered. Quote, the principal objection to a draft, General Lincoln wrote, is that it would too materially interfere with the rights of the citizen. Yet when a man contracts with another and fails to fulfill his obligation, his property becomes forfeit, and he is imprisoned until he makes good his debt. All this against his consent, but no one contends that because it is distressing, it is therefore not to be binding. The only inquiry is whether the covenant has been made and whether it has not been broken, end quote. Now, this is the use of the word covenant in a purely secular context, but it has religious or even moral overtones. Quote, by joining in the political separation from Great Britain and the creation of new states, Lincoln insisted, all Americans had contracted with one another to see the war through to a successful conclusion. The contract was now due, and distressing or not, a citizen's obligation was to serve. Lincoln went on to say there were two sets of obligations here. Besides this contract, which seems to be of a more private nature, the covenant the people entered into as one of the United States is not only indissoluble, except by mutual consent, but their obligation to support the Union indispensable, unquote. The interesting thing here is that the reluctance of the civil authorities in the Carolinas to send troops adequate to defend Savannah and Charleston was a foretaste of the rebellion that Abraham Lincoln was dealing with 70 years later. I suspect that General Benjamin Lincoln may have gotten some of his ideas on covenant while sitting in this very building. I expect he was a member here during the last years of Ebenezer Gay and possibly through the Henry Ware years. After Henry Ware, in the first decade of the 19th century, there came an upheaval in the first parish when a minister named Richardson was called. Questions were raised of his personal propriety and also questions of the new theology that came to be called Unitarian. In the ensuing trouble, Mr. Richardson survived the attempt to dismiss him, but a lot of the church, including General Lincoln, went down the street and started what is now called the New North Church. It was right across the street from General Lincoln's house, and it later became a hotbed of abolitionist agitation. There are many fascinating byways to investigate in this history, which we don't have time to do this morning. Let me pass on with a few words about the most famous descendant of the Hingham-Lincoln clan. His legacy to us is this nation we live in. If you compare America before the Civil War with it after the war, it's almost like two different nations. The war eliminated formal slavery, but not the economic subjugation and oppression of African Americans. Abraham Lincoln was born 215 years ago next Friday. It is said that his favorite riddle was this: if you call a tail a leg, how many legs does a dog have? The answer is 4, because calling a tail a leg doesn't make it one. Lincoln was one of the finest lawyers this country ever produced, and he was well familiar with the many ways people have of bending truth, of calling a leg a tail a leg. He was also a championship wrestler, but you didn't know that. We've talked about prior generations of Lincolns with this church. As far as we know, Abraham Lincoln belonged to no church and had no connection with Hingham except his ancestry. But among all our presidents, down to our present one, he grappled most publicly with real religious questions. He was a crafty and subtle writer, an astute politician, and it is hard to guess his real theological leanings. But Gary Wills, who wrote a book on the Gettysburg Address, concluded that Lincoln was most accurately described as a transcendentalist. His law partner, William Herndon, read the Transcendentalists and was fond of quoting our own Unitarian forebear, Theodore Parker, as Lincoln used Parker's phrase of government, of the people, by the people, and for the people, to close out his oration at Gettysburg. Theodore Parker belonged to the second generation of Transcendentalists. The Transcendentalists were philosophical idealists. They know that a statement like, all men are created equal, is an ideal, which will always be realized imperfectly in the real world. We have fallen short and will continue to fall short of its full promise. But the ideal, once stated, has a power of its own, a power which brought on a terrible swift sword, which set brother against brother and buried the flower of a generation in graveyards throughout the South. It was a terrible price to pay, but it rid the nation of the practice of slavery, if not of its long moral stain. In his address at Gettysburg, Abraham Lincoln articulated a new American creed which set our sights high. It was a moment of which any Lincolns, any liberals, any Hinghamites, any Americans can be proud. And it holds up a standard for each of us to aspire to make his words true. We have not brought into being the country of which Lincoln spoke, but we are trying in a million ways to do just that. Amen. Our closing hymn, We Shall Overcome. extinguish the chalice with the words of the order of service. We extinguish this flame. We're not the light of truth. We want to bring the or the joy of our faith. These are our hearts. And we are together. What we call the beginning is often the end. And to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from. We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all of our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. Amen. Go in peace.